Okay, welcome everyone to the Lincoln Institute podcast. I don't know if this is the first, second, third one. We've filmed so many now, but we're going to try to make this a lot more consistent. The ultimate goal for the podcast is to basically talk about what's happening here in California. There's so many different issues on college campuses around the entire state. But it's also just to kind of tell people, every day what's happening here at the Institute and what we're dealing with and what we're fighting for. I want to kind of make it a tradition when we start this podcast is to start with a little bit of history. I think that when you're dealing with things that are happening right now, understanding what certain leaders and how they took on certain situations, I think really means a lot. And so kind of put us in the mindset before we bring on my co-host and my guest today. We'll also have a really great interview at the end of the podcast. But with that being said, I want to say our story and of someone. At the age of 23, Abraham Lincoln found himself in a situation where he had to deliver a speech amidst a brawl. It was in the early 1830s during his time as a young Illinois legislator. While the exact details vary in historical accounts, it was known that Lincoln, for his towering height and physical strength, intervened and broke up this huge fight that was happening while he was giving his speech. Once the disruptions was quelled, Lincoln, undeterred by the chaos, proceeded to deliver his speech. His ability to maintain confidence and deliver a speech after was well known, and determination of resilience, qualities that would define his leadership for years to come. When I read that story earlier, and I'll give credit to AI for putting together and formulating it, I saw it and I was like, I need a better formulated situation there. But it made me think about, every day you go through chaos. Every day there's problems and there's everyday issues that happen. And you almost have to go handle it and then get back to business, right? You have to handle it and then go back and say what you need to say and do what you got to do. Take care of your family, take care of your kids, and then get back to business. And I think especially here in a state like California, there's so much chaos constantly. And I think our mindset, especially when we're here at the Institute and we talk all over, is about how do you have a strong mindset and deal with it and then get back to business, handle the chaos and then get back to business. Abraham Lincoln, what a great example. With that, let's start our show. As usual, I think James has been on here a few times. We're joined by James Saunders. James, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. It's been an interesting week. It's been an interesting month already, March. My birthday's coming up. It's been a crazy month leading up to it. But so far, I saw a video the other day, and it seems like it comes up every week. There's a news article about immigration, about what's happening at the southern border. I saw recently in Texas, there was a storming, but even here in California, some bills are trying to get passed. Local assemblywoman here, Kate Sanchez, was on the news lately, or there's a clip that we have of basically her fighting against a bill, supporting it. So what's your thoughts, though, in general about immigration and what's happening here in California?
I mean, immigration, one thing. I mean, usually it's a net positive economically. You just look at the graphs, look at the data. The immigration we're seeing today is not that kind of immigration whatsoever, especially here in California. Texas is stepping up, cutting out, or at least trying their best to cut out illegal immigration. But when you have massive droves of people just coming into the U.S., unchecked, and a lot of times what you see is it's not just people from South America and Latin America, it's people from Asia, East, the Middle East. It's pretty bad what's happening. There's a lot of people we basically don't know coming into the country.
Yeah, I think that's the most surprising thing about, I grew up in Texas, and so I went to school in Arizona, and there's always been immigrants, there's always been immigration flows, and, we had caravans before, but it's interesting that it's coming from so many different countries. I don't know if I've seen it, and maybe it just hasn't been shown, or maybe it's just now highlighted more because of social media. I don't know, but I've seen the video of it the other day, like you were saying. But one of the things that scares me too is I saw a article about a judge in Venezuela saying that his criminals, and maybe we've got to pull up the article somewhere, and we can fact check this, but basically that all the criminals in Venezuela are now going up north into here in the U.S. It's just crazy.
Probably less harsh on them here. I mean, compared to being a criminal down there, it's just it's a small number. There's millions, over a million people have just come into the country in the last couple of years through the border, and you're gonna get some bad people that come along with them,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like a free for all right now. It's like
But why do
criminals.
you think it's, I mean, it's different. I feel like it's different than years
It
past.
is
Why do
different.
we feel, I mean, what's happening now? I don't know.
We have a giant sign that says "Come in," and unlike the Statue of Liberty, this is basically it's a free for all. There's no organization to it. People who are trying to come here legally through the process can, and so everyone is just resorting to illegal immigration because basically you can just walk right in. Before, it used to be a more complicated process because we like to screen the people coming in, kind of like you would do for a concert or anything. There's a little bit of security check or something. Not anymore.
Do you have any faith that it's gonna change?
Not with this current administration, not with the California government right now. I mean, we'll have to see some pretty major policy changes and
Yeah.
enforcement of law.
Yeah. Speaking about policy, we spoke a little bit last time we were filming and doing some stuff about Proposition 1. At the time, the vote wasn't in. And for people that don't know, Proposition 1 was, I think it was like 6 billion or so, or some billions, going into mental health and, fighting mental health here in the state of California. At the time, it was still getting passed. I think it was down by a little bit. I think it barely passed now, so it's official. I think it's official now. It's passed. I was a little, I haven't had a strong feelings about it just because, I like what, obviously what it says it wants to do, help mental health. I mean, that's something that who doesn't want to help mental health? But I was a little worried about how much money was getting spent. And my major concern is I feel like we put a lot of money into mental health, and we're talking constantly about mental health, and the problem constantly keeps getting worse. And I'm curious of what's going on and with that. And so I think for sure, and I want to get your take on this, but I think for sure we need to monitor Proposition 1 and really see what the benefits come from it. When in the next how many years that it goes for, but really see if we're putting 6 billion, so mental health at the number right now, I don't know what it is, but whatever the number is right now, it should go down, correct?
It should,
I
but
mean,
in my opinion, what I think is gonna happen, we're just gonna spend some money. We're gonna have some stuff that looks nice, some I don't know, virtue signaling, and then it's just gonna there goes 6 billion of the U.S. or the California taxpayer money. It's already a cause already putting billions too, and the branding is phenomenal in the bill. I mean, who doesn't want to help homeless, mental health? I mean,
right.
I'm fully in support of helping.
Hmm.
We're a rich nation, a
We
rich
wouldn't.
state. We got to help them out. But it's different when you basically waste billions, tens of billions as a state, and you're basically just asking for more.
Yeah.
And you're not spending it right, and you're gonna keep not spending it right.
Well, and I brought this up last time when you said is, I don't mind spending money, on things that, if I buy something, I get some service for it. I don't mind giving taxes if I know that I'm getting something back for it, you know? And so if I feel like it's going to something that's not getting wasted, no problem. But it just seems like we keep putting money in and it keeps getting worse. I like to talk about Holland. I would never want in the Netherlands or the European, government at all, like here in even though even here in California, getting close to it. But one thing I'll say about the Netherlands is that when a policy or something is really bad, they analyze it, they get the data, and they basically go, okay, we're going to end this policy. We're done. In the U.S., it's different. In the U.S., when we get the data, say the policy is bad, they go, you know what, it's not a bad policy. We just didn't give it enough money. And then the next thing you know, these awful policies that have shown that they're wrong and bad end up getting more money and end up doubling down on it. And I just don't know if that's working. I'm not seeing the results. And maybe there's some programs that they're lack of funding. I'm not trying to say that no program needs more funding, but I think we really need to do means test some of this stuff and really see where's it happening. What's your thoughts?
I mean, you definitely need like an audit, especially where all the money is going, because some corporations a winner at the end of every bill. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you make a good point. In the U.S., there's kind of this mindset I think from lawmakers that you need to make another law, do another law, just fix it with another law. It's you should be evaluating what you've done in the past and change it. And laws should only be kind of not a last resort, but further down the road than letting society figure it out, letting the private market figure it out. And there's an oversaturation of laws. When was the last time you heard laws get repealed? It's just more laws as time goes on. It's exponential growth. When it comes to specifically the money, the auditing of it, seeing the return, you don't see it.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
you'll see a couple facilities pop up, and it's probably all this. Knowing California, it's probably all one owner who's just basically making billions or at least millions off of opening these new facilities, and then the net change won't be there though.
Well, I hope things change, but and kind of transitioning into our next topic is uh, because of stuff like this. I think because you see the waste and you hope for change and it doesn't seem to happen. I think it's actually in the last 2 years we were looking at before the show is that there's a lot of people leaving the state. I think it leads to a distrust when you don't when you make these propositions and things don't happen and then so actually, I hope for the best for Prop One. I actually hope that this investment that Californians and tax money will go to actually helping. But if it doesn't, I think that we're going to lead to the situation that we're seeing now of people leaving the state. One of the funny stories that we got was not I don't want to say funny. It was, but I find LAX funny. Just because you almost have to laugh about how bad it is.
Oh, it's chaos, chaos.
Luckily, I get to go to John Wayne here in Orange County. That's a little bit nicer SNA. Just easier to.
It's a perk. It's a perk of Orange County. Come on, John Wayne Airport.
It's a get to go through. But LA, I mean, it was looking at this article. People, were stuck in traffic. They just left their cars there. They just left their cars, and to catch leaving. And I don't know I don't know how that's better for them, but. It's just it seems nightmare. I went there at 5 a.m. the other day, and it still took me about an hour to get to the front. So I think though it's indicative. It's funny. I was saying it's like the people are leaving the state. They can't even leave the state. They can't even get out of LAX.
Yeah, I think indicative is the right word. First of all, with LAX, that's somewhere you'd want your tax dollars going to, and they are redoing it. It's taking years. It's been under process for years. They're saying they want it ready for the Olympics 2028, World Cup 2026.
Good luck.
Why can't we do it now for the citizens? Like, why aren't there? Or you would think that one of the most crucial infrastructures is the airports, like the airport, the harbor, and the freeways. You'd think the airport is where they would focus, get a lot of attention, have crews working day and night. Not saying that the same guy working 24 hours, but just rotate. Get the work done. But it doesn't happen. I think people leaving their cars behind is a little bit a little funny. Does not really fully thought through, but it kind of shows kind of the desperation to leave. They were just going on vacation, not leaving the state.
Yeah, maybe it's like a rental car or something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
maybe if it was a rent a car, I could see it. I wouldn't do my own car. But rent a car,
Yeah.
you just call her.
I
It's
don't
like,
know.
come
I
get
really
it. Come on.
don't. Yeah.
It's outside Delta. No, but I mean, a lot of people are leaving the state of California. And it's because of stuff like that, where you would think your money is going. I mean, again, we've talked about this before. You pay the highest taxes. We're in the top three, I think, of the states with the highest taxes. And you don't see the results for it. And you can go to another state, have a higher quality of life, have more money in your wallet for your retirement, lower cost of living, and a government that actually serves you rather than, I guess. I don't know what our government's serving right now, what the California government's serving.
Well, yeah, it's a shame because you look at California. I mean, as mentioned, I grew up in Texas. It's flat. It's if you like in Dallas, if you like shopping, you like restaurants, you like maybe some bars or something. Great place, but other than that, it's not naturally beautiful. California is the most beautiful place in the world.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Couldn't
people
agree more.
travel around the world to be in California. The idea that Americans here don't feel like it's a place they can grow their family, it's a place for them to grow their business, and they have to go somewhere else to do that, I think is really sad. And you're right. It's like, who is the leadership trying to serve? What interests are they trying to serve? Are they trying to serve, the everyday person, or are they trying to serve the interest of, who's ever running Sacramento at the time? And who has the biggest persuasion or lobbyist firm in Sacramento. And I think there's going to be a moment where people start waking up, though, and I think people already are. And it's not about Republican or Democrats. I think there's just people in general are seeing that whatever's happening right now isn't working, and there needs to be something better.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the struggle with a binary choice, but if what's currently is not working, you're not going to yell at them to fix it. It's you have to, implement change, and that's where people go and vote and such. But right now, California, you're just not seeing people aren't seeing, the government serve them. They're not the community's not being served, and there's better community elsewhere at the moment.
Yeah.
Again, beautiful, beautiful state, so diverse, so rich in wealth and resources, but just can't seem to make it work. And if you can't make it work here with everything you got, it's it's not a lack of money, it's not a lack of resource, it's not a lack of human capital.
Yeah.
It's a lack of leadership, at least strong leadership in the right direction.
Well, I agree. One thing also is a lack of leadership, and our next topic here, and I think is also indicative of California. But at first I was just going to blame California. Like, is this a California thing? I had to Google. I actually had to go a little bit deeper and figure if this is like something that's actually happening, because I never, even saw it. But there was a dog napping and a dog napping ring, I guess, in L.A. on stealing people's dogs. If your dogs aren't protected and your leaders aren't protecting your dogs, what can you do? What is there to do? I don't want to make, though, this just a California. I actually Googled it and I go US, and it actually says here that in the dog napping is dog napping is a problem in the US with millions of dogs and cats stolen each year. I just skipped that word.
Yeah. Prevailing?
Prevalent, whatever. Dog napping is in the U.S.
It's a problem.
Millions of dogs and cats are stolen each year, according to the CTVSE, whatever that is. Crazy. Who does that?
I mean, some people just trying to make a quick buck, I guess. Dogs, especially fur babies, they're more popular with the current generations. Less maintenance in a kid, I guess. Especially in LA, though, you got the designer dogs. You got dogs. There's plenty of dogs in shelters that need homes, but these are dogs that are like $10,000. Shipped from Asia or this breeding place in Canada, or the purebreds, the miniature poodles, the French bulldogs.
Do you think they're stealing them for that because they know that they're that
Oh
expensive?
yeah, that's
Really?
gotta be, because there's plenty of dogs out there. In the shelter, you could. I mean, it's
Right.
that's really
Right.
sad, but there's a lot of dogs
They're
there.
trying to take.
Yeah.
Well, in the article, it was a Rottweiler. It was like a purebred puppy. So what was it? I'm sure that was a.
I'm sure it's a motivating factor. I mean, also, I wouldn't want to try kidnap a Rottweiler. That's not for me. That sounds. I'd rather go for the French bulldog, but there's money there.
There was another one I saw. It was a French bulldog. It was also stolen. I think
mean,
Lady
that one you
Gaga's dog was a
Really?
French bulldog that got kidnapped. Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, you would think Lady Gaga has some security around her dog,
Well, they held. It was a crazy story. It was like blackmail for Lady Gaga's dog.
I mean, it's like kids, I get it. My family has a dog. We love them to death. A lot of people do anything for their pets, and that's not a bad thing. People will exploit it. Especially in a state where the crime isn't going punished. You're gonna see your dogs go missing. Especially if you spend $10,000 on them.
What is this state? What is the? No, I'm not going to blame California on this. What is this world coming to when you can't protect your dogs and you stealing another man's dog?
Yeah,
What kind of person you steal another man's dog?
Also, you would think, dogs are originally there to protect you. Like, if I got a big dog,
You know what?
a German
Maybe I need
Shepherd.
that dog to be taken.
Yeah.
If you can't protect me,
Yeah,
you're supposed to protect me. How am I supposed to protect?
Yeah, you have a Doberman or a German Shepherd or a Great Dane. That's a little harder to kidnap. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
or dog.
I guess when they're puppies, they still don't know. But it's sad. I hope from this story, I think they caught the person, so that's a good thing. I wouldn't. This is in my eyes, if there is truly a dog napping ring and they somehow come to Orange County or come here even for making themselves known here in Southern California, I would support vigilantes like Batman, people like that to just, and not for any other crimes, but just to beat the heck out of dog nappers. If you're a dog napper out there, you should be known now that vigilantes will come out there and just beat the crap out of you.
Yeah, hey, dogs, cats, other pets, they're part of the family. You come after family, you better be prepared for the consequences.
Exactly. I agree with that. Um, Anything else? Do we have any other ask topics that we want to bring up? Anything you want to shout out before we close out? I have to give this interview today to Mr. Will Swaim.
No, I'm just happy California is getting back to what it used to be with this good weather.
Yeah.
Right now, we're,
Well,
we're
actually,
enjoying some sunshine, spring break era. It's a good time to
thank
be in
God, it's just so
SoCal.
rainy. So speaking about Mr. Will Swaim, he's the executive director of the California Policy Center. I believe so. He has actually his own podcast. I need to get that before we talk here. But any questions you think I should ask him?
I mean, Will's a sharp guy. Anything you ask him will be he'll give a good answer. I do know he was formerly completely on the other side, communist kind of guy, very almost anarchist. And he kind of had a coming to light, understanding free markets and policy and how to truly help people isn't to just give them a bunch of stuff. So I would definitely dive deep into his background and what made him kind of realize, what he was thinking was flawed, and what recently brought him to the light.
Yeah,
So I would go there.
that's a good question.
Yeah.
James, thank you for joining us. I will see you again at some point.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon. Awesome. Well, I'm so glad to be here with the president of the California Policy Center, Will Swaim.
Thank you.
Glad for you to be here. So it was interesting. I was just sitting with James, and he told me something I didn't necessarily know, and is that you weren't always on the current path that you're on now, that you kind of started off a more left-leaning
Oh,
area. So I didn't know.
yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having
Yeah.
me, and thank you for opening with the most difficult question. I think it's really important. My own personal story, I think, is important for Californians, especially, to understand that the people we regard as opponents or the enemy are often people like me who just, I was raised by nice conservative parents, went to college and became a communist. And I don't mean like I was, sort of marginally influenced by leftist thinking or Marxist philosophy. I was a Marxist who belonged to the Communist Party USA. And I played in a punk rock band, so it all seemed utterly consistent. And when you look back on it, punk rock is more about anarchy than it is about like conformity and rigorous totalitarian, authoritarian rule. I didn't see the contradiction at all. It just seemed like both things were about tearing down the bourgeoisie.
A quick question.
Please.
Does the anarchy, do they have presidents of the anarchy? True story here. I went to Berkeley, and and one of the reasons why I even came to California.
You're not going to tell me the anarchists had a president.
They had an anarchy club.
Yeah.
And I asked him about it. I go, yeah, come to our meeting. We're going to have an election for the president. And I go, this is the antithesis of what the philosophy and the switch reversal in so many college kids, where they think anarchy, where the
Right.
But
I think what's interesting is that even there, they recognize this kind of natural law value in coming together as a what would you call it? An improvisational and organic community. And I'm
Right.
thinking here of Alexis de Tocqueville and how Americans get together to do things. One of the things he admired about America in the 1830s, we would come together to do a thing, and when that thing was done, we would go away, right? So even the anarchists get this.
Yeah.
But when I was at SC, the Communist Party was, as you'd expect, it was a marginally influential group. And I say marginally, I mean really marginally. This is 1978, 79. We're still 10 years away. We're a couple of years away from Ronald Reagan getting into the White House. We're 10 years away from the fall of the Berlin Wall. Count on me, I always tell people to, kind of get in line right at the worst moment for whatever it is. Like there's the Communist Party and here I am showing up, and 10 years later, it's like, in complete retreat. But the bottom line was that the way I got into it was I wanted to be a Catholic priest. My parents didn't want me to go into seminary. They said, go to a major university. We went to USC. Just go there for 1 year. I did. And in that 1 year, I shaved my hair into a mohawk, got my ear pierced, joined this punk band and the Communist Party, right? And my parents' response was, we told you to go to college to learn about the world, not to become and then you'd have to bleep this out on any family podcast. That was my dad. My mother doesn't curse. So I become a communist, and then I go to grad school and I study Marxist theory here at the University of California, Irvine. And when I say study Marxist theory, I mean that was my whole deal was I was going to apply Marxist theory to American history, and that was not a rare or marginal thing. By the time I get into the university as a graduate student, that's what the university is doing. It is purging And I'm not just speaking about UC Irvine. Nationally, we were purging like the 1950s scholars who might be progressive left, or progressive liberals, but they were mostly, moderates who really admired the American system. By the time I get in there, it's all about how do we tear the system down and how do we prepare this next generation of academics to get in and teach the next generation of kids about how to tear this horrible and exploitive system down. And there's tremendous irony in the fact that you are going to a public university that is paid for by other people's money and then using that education to tear down the system that made prosperity possible in the first place. And that revelation only occurred to me slowly and over time as I started to have children and then ran a left-wing newspaper. I ran a paper from 1995 to 2007 that was owned by, I doubt many of your listeners will know about this, but it's sort of an interesting journalism history thing. There was a paper in New York called The Village Voice. The Village Voice bought the LA Weekly. These are alternative news weeklies that had news, arts, and entertainment. So we would write about punk rock and hip hop and rap music and theater and film and art and food and investigative journalism. And in the course of running the paper, two things happened. Number one, I was running a business. I had to make payroll. I had to pay people. I had to meet with regulatory agencies about where our paper could be distributed and how. I had to sell advertising to people who ran a business, right? So I was encountering, outside of the university, I was encountering real life, right? And so that changed me. And then you have your children are growing up and you ask them, what values do I want them to have? And there's a famous line, I think it's sometimes attributed to Dennis Prager, that people on the progressive left do not preach what they practice. He's inverted the old, practice what you preach. They do not preach what they practice. What did people like me preach? Leftism, socialism, a dictatorship of the proletariat. What did we practice? Self-sufficiency, independence, going to church, paying your mortgage, getting your kids into a good college, helping them study. All the things I did were completely antithetical to the things that I talked about. And that contradiction was very, very difficult for me. I have a powerful, because I'm a journalist, and that's what I ultimately studied in school, theology and journalism. They kind of go together when you think about it. But what I was ultimately doing as a journalist helped me understand, I would watch my reporters go out and report on what I thought were the most obvious public policy solutions to the problems of poverty and lack of education and lack of access to healthcare or whatever, and watch how every one of those investigative reports showed these systems were corrupt, they failed, they did not produce the things they said they would, even when they were run by the people who were their most ardent advocates, Democrats. I watched as Republicans gamed the financial system and played footsie with government unions and then bankrupted Orange County in 1994. A year that may sound to some of your listeners like ancient history, but that's only 30 years ago, right? 40 years ago. Oh my gosh, we are losing track.
1994?
30 years ago.
Yeah, I was 4 years old.
Yeah, so there you go. 1994, Orange County is the largest municipal bankruptcy in history. And why? Because we had a bunch of Republicans who heard some guy say we can make money from nothing. And they invested all these public funds into crazy, exotic financial instruments. And when those things went upside down, the county lost everything. It was the largest municipal bankruptcy in the history of America. So I looked at that. I looked at this evidence that, everything government touches is like the reverse Midas touch. It doesn't change things into gold. It changes gold into things like crap. Yeah. Can I say that on
Yeah, you can say
okay. So, you have these experiences both as a business person operating a company that has to make money and has to produce payroll. And your own reporting is showing you the shortcomings of your best intentioned, liberal and progressive incentives. And also the Republicans are failing simultaneously. Republicans in office are not immune from the seductions of power and doing crazy things with government. We see this all the time today.
Yeah.
We have seen this throughout American history, that even some of the best conservatives do things that are dumb. And it's our job on the outside to hold them to the principle. And the principles for me are embedded deeply in the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, Abraham Lincoln's thinking about, the second rebirth of America in the Civil War. So anyway, that's how the story turns out. I gradually migrate. I mean, gradually. I'd love to tell this story really quickly. Do I have a moment?
Yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead. Of course.
I used to do public affairs broadcasting for PBS, both on radio and TV in Southern California. And I was always sort of the left-wing guy who would be brought on with a conservative. Well, increasingly, my ideas are starting to change, and so I would have to get with one of the conservative guys I was talking with. Said, "You are the most agreeable leftist I have ever met. Like, you will sometimes change your mind right on camera. What's happening?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, the fact is I'm losing faith in my leftism." And I would get together with some of these guys, and we would literally. This isn't. I don't know how to put this. I don't want to say we rigged the show, but in order to have good drama on the show, you had to have some kind of dramatic disagreement, some kind of conflict. And so we would have an issue. Maybe it was a tax hike or something. Well, I'm a lefty. I'm representing the lefty, so I have to be for it because it's for education. Who doesn't want more money for education? So I would have to get together with them and say, like, look, I really think this tax policy is stupid. I don't think it's going to produce what the left says it's going to produce. The teachers union is corrupt and out of control. That's not going to work. And yet I realize that my role on this show is to say that it will. So here's what I'm going to say, but I really can't sell my soul entirely. We have to play this well. But you had to choreograph this thing, and it was bogus. It was, bogus in the sense that I think we faithfully played out the different arguments. It was like a debate, and if you're an attorney or on a debate team, you understand that some of this stuff is merely theatrical. You don't have to believe the proposition in order to defend it. But that was my job increasingly. And then finally, I just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I migrated, through libertarianism and into conservatism.
I wonder how many out there. I'm curious. I bet there's a few out there that sell their soul for just to stay on the news and keep their jobs, and they don't really believe in a lot of it. It's interesting, your story, and I loved it just because just the arc of from one end and then how you got there, and it's interesting to me is that from the Institute standpoint, we travel on college campuses. I got to talk to college kids all the time. I feel like when I talk to them, they're not becoming conservative. They're not like MAGA Republicans,
right.
Rare. You obviously always have your college Republicans. But I do see a little bit more of students really questioning institutions. And even here in California, they know who's in charge. A lot of the same people that they see promoting a lot of the same stuff are in charge, but they're also not seeing things happen. They're not seeing things get better for themselves. Their gas is getting higher. They're harder to get a job.
But homelessness was cured. We have no more homeless.
Right. And I was just with James here, and we talked about Prop 1. We talked about, and to me, when you read it, you go, oh, this is the greatest. Are we going to fix homeless with this?
Yeah.
Mental health is cured in California. Then you look at how much we've spent over the years on, every program. It seems we put more money into it, and it doesn't ever seem to get better. It always seems that there needs to be more money.
Right.
So I'm just curious.
This is what's really fascinating. I mean, let's just look at this historically, that Gavin Newsom, just to take the guy who I think really owns this issue now, and I mean owns it for better and worse, mostly worse. Newsom is mayor in the early 2000s in San Francisco and declares that he's going to end homelessness by the time he's done, serving as mayor of San Francisco. It accelerates in San Francisco. Homelessness does. There are more homeless when he leaves San Francisco than when he starts as mayor. And he goes on to become lieutenant governor, I think is his next role, and insists from this position he's going to eliminate homelessness statewide. And at this point, I'm becoming a conservative and a critic of the Democrats, but also, and I want to be open about that. I'm a critic of liberal policy, and especially progressive policy, because it doesn't do what it says it will do. It doesn't educate people, and it certainly doesn't house the homeless or cure the spiritual malady that is beneath all addiction, I believe. So he starts to run for governor in 2016. This is, 2 years before he's going to really run for governor. Jerry Brown is still in office, but he's talking up a big storm about how he's going to eliminate homelessness. Meanwhile, San Francisco is swirling the drain, and homelessness is only one of the terrible issues there. And I start to tell anybody who will listen, have you paid attention to the conditions in which he left San Francisco, and now he wants to be governor? Flash forward today, as you and I sit here, he's talking about being president, right?
Yeah.
He's not talking about it, but everyone knows he's thinking about it. So I would just remind people, this is a guy who has said since the early 2000s that he would eliminate homelessness, and everywhere he's gone, homelessness has gotten worse. Homelessness, despite Newsom's spending, there are estimates that his spending has been $21 billion in 5 years, and that's before March 5th. I guess we'll talk about Prop 1. So he has spent more than all other administrations before him combined to reduce homelessness, and it has accelerated because of bad public policies. We could look at the price of housing, but that's not really the issue. That's not what's driving homelessness. What's driving it is, what do they say? You incentivize what you subsidize. Mm-hmm. So in San Francisco, it's been, let's give junkies clean needles. Yep. Let's allow people to engage in public sex acts and public defecation. Gosh, sorry to say that. Just what a terrible image. I hope nobody's eating. But you allow these things to happen, and you attract more people who like that lifestyle, mm-hmm. or who aspire to it, or who say, you know what, living on the streets is a thing I could really dig. So they end up in San Francisco. And San Francisco goes through this periodically. The history of San Francisco is not just the last, let's call it 20 or 30 years. This is a cycle that San Francisco puts itself through. It forgets the lessons about subsidizing bad behavior, and it does it over and over. It did it in the 1920s and 30s. It did it again in the 1960s, 70s, and into the 80s when it cleaned it up a little bit under Dianne Feinstein, who was mayor then. Say what people will about Dianne Feinstein. She was a very moderate Democrat. She was a mm-hmm. sensible, moderate Democrat. And my God, as a conservative, what I would not pay to see a moderate governor, a moderate mayor in San Francisco again. Yeah. That's what San Francisco needs. It has to go through these various fevers, which it then purges. So on Prop 1, we've got a guy who has spent more than everybody before him to eliminate homelessness, has produced more homelessness, and now comes Proposition 1. And you guys may already have discussed this, so I apologize if it's old material, but let's remember that the way he set this up was he knew if he runs for the White House, he must have a solution to homelessness. And it has to be better than I've spent more money than everybody else. It has to be about the outcome. He has to produce an outcome. The governor loves to talk about how much money he has spent on a thing, but never about what that money produced. So he now knows that if he runs for president, he's going to be held accountable for mm-hmm. everything that he has ever done or said, and even things that he didn't say or do. So he comes up with this $6.7 billion, I think it is, or $6.4 billion bond. And let's remember what a bond is. It's a debt. It is mm-hmm. a borrowing. It's like a mortgage on a house or a car payment, and there's interest on it. So what's the interest payment? By the time this $6.4 billion bond finishes, it will cost around $15 billion, more than twice as much as the initial bond. So it's not really a $6.7 or $6.4 billion bond. It's more like a $15 billion bond. Your generation, thank you so much for your service, will be paying off that bond for the next 30 years. Yeah. I'll be dead by then, probably killed by crushing tax burdens. But that's what this guy wanted. He wanted a solution so badly where he could say he was doing a thing that was going to change everything, that he was going to make this thing happen. How did he do that? He tried to guarantee its success by doing a number of things. Number one, he killed and slowed down any other attempt to put a ballot initiative, a statewide ballot measure on the ballot on March 5th. Everything else was pushed to November so that he could have the stage all to himself. Number two, he raised and spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $21 million through a PAC that he owns, money that was given to him by people who have business, given to his political action committee by people who have business before him. These are called behested payments. You probably know all about these, but the bottom line is you don't give the money directly to the governor. You give it to his pet project, and the governor will smile kindly upon your other business that you have with the state. So he spends about $21 million bucks on this campaign for Prop 1, which is going to, again, eliminate homelessness, which he's been promising since the early 2000s. So wipe out all the competition for media coverage on this, and then spend $21 million through a PAC against nothing. The opponents were unorganized and had no money at all. And still, the initiative was going to be very close, and he knew it. So what else did he do? We have the expanded election counting process, the ballot counting process in California. You send out sample ballots to everybody a month before the election, and then you allow things to dribble in after Election Day for about a month. So we're talking about like a 60-day election cycle. I don't know if you know about this part. The balloting was so close on this initiative, so 50-50, that Newsom directed his political action committee to send Democrats into Democrat precincts, Democrat-heavy precincts, to identify people whose ballots have been thrown out because of some sort of irregularity, a technical violation of submitting your ballot, like missing signature, for instance, or a wrong date or something like that. So he used this elongated period to go cure, they call it, to go cure these faulty ballots. Now, I am not a huge fan of Donald Trump, but let's remember that when Donald Trump tried to do something similar in Georgia, the left didn't just vilify him. They prosecuted him for asking, can you find me 11,000 ballots? And yet the governor's political action committee's email was, we need to find a few thousand votes, because that's how close it was. It was within a few thousand votes. It is, as you and I speak, still within a few thousand votes. Looks like it's going to win. So, long story short, I have hogged the microphone here too much. This is a massive expenditure. It will not work, and it was rigged through the system that this governor has helped to create. And is that rigged? Yes. Was it stolen? No, not illegally.
Yeah.
But it was stolen legally.
Well, California, our rules and laws. I mean, from someone I grew up in Texas. My grandfather and my family grew up on my mom's side here in California, but grew up in Texas. Went to school in Arizona. Lived in Arizona for almost 10 years. Coming here to California, learning about just kind of the rules and just kind of just how things are covered.
Was it shocking?
It was shocking. I mean, ballot harvesting, curing a ballot. They do that. They do that now in Arizona. They can cure ballots now, but curing your ballots and trying to find it, it's just crazy to me. But I think it's just overall California. Some of the rules. I mean, we were even talking here a little bit about reparations and about we talk about spending money too. It's like there's crime. What James was here was talking about crime. There's so much stuff, crazy stuff, and we spend all it. It's just so confusing on how we spend our money and what the priorities I think are.
Yes. I think this is one of the biggest challenges. So California Policy Center, one of the things that we do is we organize local elected officials, that is below the level of state officials. So not in the state legislature, not the governor or the secretary of state or the attorney general, but we work at the county and city level and down to the school district level, pardon me, to help local elected officials understand first an answer to the question, what is government for? Because a huge amount of what government now does has nothing to do with its constitutional tasks, its constitutional responsibility, where the guidelines are really crystal clear is in the founding. This is not just some sort of academic enterprise when we talk about the founding, when we talk about the Constitution, the Declaration, the Federalist Papers. We are talking about people who spent lots of time. I'm talking about James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and others, Jefferson, who spent hours and hours and hours, years of collective labor thinking about what the best minds in our species over millennia had thought about the problem of justice and just government and how you organize a government that is truly just. So this isn't just some idea as the left would have it. The Constitution is not just a set of suggestions which might be nice if applied appropriately. It is crystal clear what government is for and what it's not for. It is not, I love to laugh that we are supposed to have the freedom under government to pursue our own vision of happiness. Mm-hmm. And what they meant at the time clearly was about virtue, to pursue your own virtue. It wasn't just go shoot up heroin or something or go defecate on the streets of San Francisco. That makes you happy. It's not that. It's about let's call it virtue. I mean, I know it's an old-fashioned word, but it really means seeking man's and woman's highest good. So these people thought a lot about this, and they thought about what a virtuous government looked like. And so we talk to local officials in two ways. We say, look, you are only allowed to help create the conditions in which freedom flourishes in its most virtuous way. You are not here to subsidize a football stadium. You are not here to subsidize bad behavior. You're not here to promote Will Swaim's personal Catholicism or somebody else's Satanism or Wiccanism. That's not the job of government. It's to create a safe, first and foremost, public safety. Protect us from force and fraud, and especially the force and fraud of government. At the time of the founding, the big concern was what happens if we give power to the government? It does anything it wants. Well, we have the answer. We have the answer in the gulags of the Soviet Union and the massacres under Mao Zedong in China. We have the less painful but no less obvious failures of California government, where our governor cannot govern California. But yesterday, as you and I record this, this is what was it, March 21st, I guess. The governor comes out with a big statement on how to solve the problems in Gaza. And it's like, dude, solve the problems in Oakland,
You're right,
please.
exactly.
We've got trouble right here. So what is government for? Number one, there is a philosophical answer to that. It's embedded in the founding, and it is a very limited thing. It is keep people from murdering one another and keep government in a box. You're supposed to build a cage around government, not around the people. And in California, we have that reversed. Government can now do anything it wants merely by 50% of the vote of the legislature and the governor's approval plus one vote in the legislature, 50% plus one, and the governor signs off, and it's a new law. You can confiscate people's property. You can take their homes if you think that's necessary. You can limit their ability to kick somebody out of their home if they don't pay rent anymore. Not limit it. You can end the right to kick out somebody who refuses to pay. You can take the side of any worker aggrieved by any employer and make it a reason to take away somebody's business. I could go on. I even think that it's really interesting to think about the tax policy. Like, how fair is it that somebody who makes much, much more money than I have, that I can vote to take that person's money away? All I got to do is persuade 50% of the voters, plus one, to say, take that dude's money. And it's done. Like, how is that not just organized theft? It's plunder. It is like boarding a ship but with pirates and taking it over and putting everybody to the sword and then stealing all the cargo. So I don't know where we were headed with this, except that I think we were headed toward reparations, which is
just
well outside. Well outside what the state's mandate is. So reparations in California is the idea that Californians uniquely owe money and a whole raft of other things, but that we owe as taxpayers, black, white, Chinese, got here yesterday, got here 100 years ago, doesn't matter. We owe people who can prove that they are the descendants of slavery anywhere in the U.S., $1.2 million. That's what the California Reparations Commission has concluded. $1.2 million if you can prove that you are the descendant of somebody who was enslaved in America. You have to be a California resident, but your ancestors could have been enslaved in Mississippi, and we're responsible. There are many, many moral problems with that. First of all, you are taking money from people who did not commit a crime in order to give it to people who were not the victims of that crime. That's number one. It is immoral. Number two, you are really, I think, beginning to miss what has been the real problem in California with regard to black inequality. And there is black inequality.
Yeah.
And the real...
I think that's their biggest argument. That's where I think they're like, oh, well, how do you fix that problem?
Yes.
You're right.
Yeah, so they move the argument from, at some places and sometimes some racists in California did some terrible things. You and I both know there are racists all over the place. There are certainly racists in California right now. Those people are on the fringes of things. They will always be with us, not those particular people, but their intellectual and psychological offspring who are malignant and really have it all wrong when it comes down to race. But California was never a slave state. So let's be really clear about this. Historically speaking, not only was California never a slave state, even under the former Mexican government and before that under the Spanish government, slavery was banned. Slavery was banned in California about 25 years before California enters the Union in 1850. 1827, I think, is when the Mexican government banned slavery of any kind, particularly with regard to the indigenous population, because we could go on about this. There are terrible stories about how the Indian population in California was treated, and there's nuance there that needs to be uncovered. So when I make that statement, I don't mean like all Indian people all over California were always mistreated and their only misfortune was to fall into the hands of Europeans. It's much more nuanced than that. But the Mexican government prohibits slavery, and that is carried over into California's U.S. statehood. Why? Because under the California federal system, any agreements you had with prior governments, including the Mexican or Spanish, are grandfathered into the Constitution. Not all of it, but it is assumed that if you own land under the Mexicans, you still own it under the Americans. It's a real fairness issue when you think about it. Like the U.S. did not come into California in the 1840s and say, you know, whatever the Mexicans did, we don't care. We're taking your land and your land. It wasn't like that. That's not how it worked. So, no slavery in 1850. California is admitted as a free state. And there are countless stories in the 1850s which are either ignored outright by the commission, which tries to cobble together this great history. It's about 500 pages, the commission's report, trying to pretend that there was slavery in California, and not just that it existed, because there were slaves held in California. But the mistake of the commission, I think it's not a mistake, I think it's intentional, is to pretend that that was sanctioned somehow by the state.
So we got cut off for a little bit, and we got cut off, I think, right when we were talking about reparations. Please tell that story again before we cut off.
So let's talk about, in California, the Reparations Commission is trying to argue that somehow California is a systemically racist place and therefore owes any descendant, any Californian who can prove his or her descent from a slave is owed $1.2 million by the state. And the state, of course, is the taxpayers of the state. So this is wrong on moral grounds, I've argued. Number one, because it punishes people. It takes money from people who didn't commit a crime and gives it to people who did not directly suffer that crime. Second, it ignores, and I think this is perhaps even worse, it creates a narrative that is completely false about how California is and was. California was a free, slavery was prohibited in California going back to the Mexican government and the Spanish government before it. It was prohibited in the 1820s. And so by the time we enter the U.S. Statehood, California in 1850, we enter as a free state. That's part of the big compromise. Remember, in 1850, we're about 10 years away from the Civil War, and everybody's trying to kind of appease the South a little bit and keep slavery in a box, but the slave guys are really intent on expanding their authority, and all that's going to blow up in 1860 when Lincoln begins running, in 1861 when the Civil War really starts to heat up in earnest. So 1850, we're a free state. And if you read the commission, the Reparations Commission, the California State Reparations Commission report, it's about 500 pages. It is ridiculously dumb. I mean, I used to teach at the University of California, Irvine, and I can tell you I would have failed these people. It is gobbledygook. It is categorical confusions. Like at some points they're talking about how bad slavery was in Alabama. Stipulated. Got it. It was terrible. It was illegal and immoral, and slavery was bad. And the fact that it persisted in Alabama is malignant. California was not a participant in that system. Not ever. And the attempts to show that it was either deliberately misrepresent what really happened in California or just flat out ignore it. Here's the truth. The truth is that California was far better than most places in America when it came to race relations. Far better. Was it perfect? No place is perfect. Was it better than most others? Yes. How do we know? Because black people, when allowed the choice to leave the South, flooded into California voluntarily and stayed here. Now, you can argue that it wasn't a perfect place, but you can't argue that it wasn't a life raft in a sea of real criminality against black people elsewhere, specifically in the Jim Crow South. So as an example, I would point to the case of this woman named Biddy Mason, Biddy Mason. Biddy Mason is born into slavery. She is brought into California as a midwife for a Texas farmer who brings her and some others. I think there's about 11 or 12 people by last count who were brought enslaved into Southern California. And this is in the early 1850s, about 1852. This farmer arrives in what we now call San Bernardino. That is a separate county east of Orange County and LA County, north of San Diego. Very large county. And at the time, though, it's part of LA County. And at this time, California's entire population as a state is about 350,000. This is a very sparsely populated place at the time. Today, just for comparison's sake, we're about 39 million. Wow. I like to joke that 350,000, the population of California at statehood, is about the size of my homeowners association. It is not big. It is a tiny population. So therefore, this guy is able to operate, this Texas farmer with these slaves is able to operate out in this distant place, far away from LA, far away from civilization, for about 1.5 to 2 years without anybody knowing. Well, gradually word arrives at the sheriff's office in LA, where the sheriff, who's a white man, hears that some slaves are being held out in this remote part of what's now San Bernardino County. Does he ignore it? No. Does he ring the guy up on a telephone that doesn't exist and say, good for you, keep those black people enslaved? He does not. What he does do is gather a posse. It is a mixed race posse, as we would call it today. It is integrated. It includes white merchants who are ready to carry a gun and ride for 3 or 4 days out into this area to find out what the heck's going on. It includes Latinos, as we would call them today. These are typically Californios, who were people of Mexican and Spanish descent who had lived in California from the 1700s forward. It includes Native Americans, some of whom were just friends of the sheriff and ready to help, some of whom were trackers, really good at finding very difficult to find people who wanted to stay hidden out in the remotest part of California, out toward the desert, the eastern desert that shades into Arizona and Nevada. So they ride for 3 days, and it is really hostile. You know, the farther east you go, many Californians know this, you have to pass the Cajon Pass. It is high, it is windy, the weather out there can be really uncertain, but they ride. This posse of people out of LA led by this sheriff. They get out there. They find the Texas farmer. They find the African Americans. They separate the two. The sheriff walks over to the African Americans and he says, so, Ms. Mason and all you others whom I've now just met for the first time, are you here against your will? And they don't even like blink their terror as a telegraph message. They tell him, yeah, we're here against our will. This man has kept us here. He goes to the white guy, the farmer, and he says, these black people, what are they doing here? Oh, those black people, this white man says, those are my family. He says, yeah, I don't think so. We're all going back downtown. Well, that's a long haul for these people. So he gets them all on horses, and they get them back in their wagons, and they start riding east. And at some point, the white guy decides, this may not go well for me. I know that I have violated the law. They may not only confiscate these black people, they may take my property, they may put me in jail and then prison. I violated state and federal law in doing this. He skedaddles. This guy heads out as quickly as he can. In Mark Twain's words, he lights out for the territories. He goes east as fast as he can to the most slave-friendly place he can find. And this is before the Civil War. Let's remember, this is still, Civil War is still a few years off in the future. So the sheriff takes the black people before a local judge, a white man, and the judge listens to the stories and says, you're all free. He does not lock them up. He doesn't send them back to the Confederacy, what will become the Confederacy. He certainly doesn't send them back to the slave owner. He liberates them to live in California. One of those people, Biddy Mason, as I mentioned, is a midwife. She goes about the practice of midwifery, that is delivering babies and such, healthcare in general. And she begins to accrue such wealth that she becomes one of the wealthiest people in California. A black woman living in California in the 1850s becomes a millionaire and one of the wealthiest people in California.
Wow.
That's something. That tells you that California was a place that is unlike almost any other place in America, and unlike many places in the world, where a woman can rise from absolute slavery and bondage to freedom and prosperity.
Wow.
Like, how does that happen? It happens because California was a place that had its racists and was still better than a lot of other places. And the story of Biddy Mason is it's not the only story. I could tell you countless others that the Reparations Commission has misrepresented or ignored because they're inconvenient truths. Again, as conservatives, we don't have to argue that a place is utopian, that it's perfect, that it's heaven. What we can say is the place was better than a lot of the alternatives.
Right.
So anyway, that's the historical argument about reparations.
So interesting. And you know what? One thing that for us, the Institute, when we go to college campuses, is really, and I love history. I was talking to you about this earlier. I'm just a history. I love it. On the weekends, that's what I do. I listen to history. I read stuff. I wish more young Californians would know the history of our state and realize, and that's why even when I started before I talk to James, I bring up a little segment of history. Every podcast, I'm gonna bring up a little segment and just kind of like, we were able to overcome how these leaders were able to overcome this part in history. How can we apply that now? And so final question for you, and one of the big goals of the Institute is how do we get young people to become leaders? How do we get them to be the next governor, the next business leader of the state of California? If you had to give any advice to a young person that is wanting to make an impact in the state or even in the world, what would that piece of advice be?
Study these things. Wealth, prosperity, and freedom. These things are not inevitable. They are the products of systems which men and women create, and we abandon them to bad people. Whether they call themselves Republicans or Democrats, we abandon them to bad people at our own personal risk. I have 4 children. Not one of those children lives in California today. We have hacked away at the roots of prosperity in California by running off on a progressive mission to make everything equal. We have crushed family. You begin to crush family, you crush community. You crush community, you empower the bad actors in the state. Where else do people turn if their family and their communities have been destroyed? They turn to the state for solutions. And those solutions are going to be like taking a sledgehammer to an operating table. It's bad. So I would say study history. Wake up every morning grateful for the things you have. Stay engaged. I don't think that people have to stay involved in formal politics. I think that knowing about politics is our democratic responsibility. And I would argue that some of the bravest and best people I know went off and started companies that employ people, that produce value, that produce products and services that other people require. Entrepreneurs are heroic too. Not always in every area of their life. I'm not saying they're perfect, but I am saying starting a business, running a business, contributing to a business, contributing to your own financial health and well-being, your own prosperity is important. And understand the grace that we have here, that we have inherited in this country. If there's no America, there's no freedom in the world. That's the bottom line. It is darkness. It is horror. It is terror if there's no America. We're here on a salvific mission in California. We have to save California to save America, to save the world. And that doesn't mean we go crusading around looking for dragons to slay, as the old line
Right.
goes. It means we live our lives in peace, equanimity, and awareness, real awareness of what's just over the horizon.
Well, thank you so much for joining
My
us.
pleasure.
I hope to see you back.
Oh, you'll see me right down the hall.
That's right.
Such pleasure.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.